Hello and welcome to the Alpha Movement Podcast. My name is Tom Foxley and you're listening to Season 2, in fact, of the Alpha Movement Podcast. Today on the show, I am joined by Scott Carney, the author of What Doesn't Kill Us. And as you may guess from the title, it's a kind of exploration about pushing through hardship, what kind of hardship serves you, and the biological effects of it. The reason I had him on the show is because I think this pushes the tenets of what I think is a good athlete. So one of those things is embracing hardship and voluntary discomfort. And this is an exploration of that subject. And to be honest, it's a great book, and I'm happy to kind of push it through my podcast because it is a really enjoyable read. So I bring you now, Mr. Scott Carney. And Scott, welcome to the show. And thank you so much for joining me. It's a real pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, it's great to be here, man. Thanks a lot.
So, why don't we start off with what got you into journalism and why start writing?
I was originally an anthropologist, and I, got through grad school, got to the point where I was about to finish my dissertation, and I realized that I was going to spend 7 to 10 years writing like very engaging, interesting things so that 7 people would read it and then maybe give me tenure, and then I'd be on a bookshelf for the rest of my life. I just wanted to, I love anthropology. I love those questions about how, we became human and who we are as people. But I thought the outlet was terrible. So I started writing for Wired magazine and for Playboy and for Mother Jones and these other outlets that most anthropologists shun. But I'm still doing the same stuff. I'm still asking these really, really big questions, and I'm doing it for millions of people. And I think that was the main driving force for me to get into writing for the public.
So for you, what's a good question to answer?
What's a good question to answer? You mean in terms of anthropology or in terms of how to make $1 million really quick?
Anthropology.
Now, when I was doing my dissertation, I was interested in Indian film, and I was living in India for a long time. But my interest, rapidly changed after I was living there, and I started looking at, organ trafficking. So a really big, dark subject is because where I was living in the southern Indian city of Chennai, the village, right next door to my house, all of the women sold their kidneys. And so we had 80 people selling their organs. And all of a sudden I was in the middle of this just really giant story. And from there, it grew into an investigation of organ trafficking in general, which led to my first book called The Red Market, where I went around the world looking at this buying and selling of human body parts. So that was a really big question to answer, why does this happen in the world? I've written about cults. I've written about armed movements. I've done the war correspondent thing, and now I am here looking at a sort of extreme physical training and why our body is able to adapt to relatively extreme environments.
Okay, so what was the process that led you from India to Mr. Wim Hof then?
Well, so I had just done a story in Playboy about this sort of eccentric guru in middle of Arizona who had basically been promising people he could give them superpowers, walk through walls, levitate, read people's minds, doing these things which in the yoga traditions are called siddhis. And these promises he was giving to people led people down these really dark, weird, and counterproductive spiritual paths. And I told the story of one guy who ended up meditating until he died in the mountains of Arizona. And, I uncovered a sex scandal, some stabbing, some really dark stuff that happened around this pursuit of enlightenment. And we all know that there's these sham gurus out there, right? People who promise things and they're really in it for the money. And then I found this story about Wim Hof. And Wim Hof is this Dutch fitness guru who claims to be able to raise and lower his body temperature at will, control his immune system, and let people thrive in extreme environments. And, I had seen that he had done some of these crazy feats before. I'd seen that he had hiked most of the way up Mount Everest. I'd seen that he had a record for submerging himself in ice water. And I thought, wow, he's a really interesting person. But if he's making these claims that really do sound superhuman and actually dovetail with what I just mentioned, siddhis, these yogic traditions, I'm wondering that if people start following him and they're not able to replicate these feats, he's going to get people killed. So I thought I'd do another article unmasking Wim Hof as a charlatan. I was completely prepared to go in there and be like, look at all this, these false claims that don't add up. And so I flew out to Poland to meet him, got off the plane, and he's like ruddy-nosed, small gnome-like guy with but totally ripped and corded muscles, and I was like even more sure that he was a sham when I met him, and so we drive into the wilderness of Poland, and at this point Wim is not very well known. He's sort of a minor sort of, maybe he's like a Facebook meme at that point, and I sit with him one night. The first night I'm there, and we play a game of chess, and he does seem very earnest. Like I can tell that he really believes in the things that he's saying, and I decided to give him a chance. And the next day I start doing the training with him to see what it involves. And the first thing we do is this hyperventilation breathing method, where you sort of hyperventilate for 30 breaths and then hold your breath with no air in your lungs. And you sort of repeat this process back and forth until you're holding your breath for a lot longer than you expected you could. Usually I could hold my breath for maybe 30 seconds, maybe 45 seconds before I felt like I needed to gasp. And after doing a couple of these repetitions, I was holding my breath for 2 minutes. And that was super cool. Like, oh, cool. I found a way to hack my body to hold my breath. That was interesting. And then he did this other thing where it's like, okay, keep on doing the hyperventilation. And then after 30 or 40 breaths, let all the air out of your lungs and just start doing push-ups and see how many push-ups you can do. Now, I'm like an ordinary dude. Like, I'm not not fit, but I'm not, a super athlete or anything like that. At the point, I could do about 20 push-ups. And I do this breathing thing, and with no air in my lungs, I do 40 push-ups, and it was easy. Like, they just rolled out, and I was like, whoa, that's super cool. Like, I never thought I would do that much. Now, I know your listeners are like, 40 push-ups, whatever, dude. I mean, because it's not actually that crazy a number, but doing without breathing did feel pretty amazing. And to have a doubling of results like that was really cool. And then he started having us stand out in the snow. I was, and this is the other part of the training. His training is basically a breathing method and a cold exposure thing. And the first time I stood out in the snow, he said, it's going to hurt. It's, you're going to get out there and it's going to hurt. And I stand out there and he makes me stand in the snow for 5 minutes. And at the end of that, it feels like I'm on fire, right? Like, I was from Los Angeles. We're talking palm trees and swaying, temperate climate. And in 5 minutes, I'm done. I have to go run into the sauna, basically crying, right? and then, and he's like, that's totally normal. That's what's going to happen. But come out and do this the next day. And so the next day we do the breathing, and then I go stand out in the snow again, and it's 10 minutes before I feel like I want to curl up into a fetal position and fall. But then, but the progress doubled in just a day. And the next day we do it and it's 30 minutes. And by the end of the week, I'm standing in the snow for an hour, and it's not just bare feet. I'm in my swim trunks, bare chest in the middle of Polish winter. And this is the winter that stopped the Nazi army, right? This is not like, a wimpy winter. This is the real thing. And I'm standing in the snow, hot. And I'm just like, oh my God, this guy really, really has something. He made this claim, I can make you not a wimp in the snow. And I was not a wimp in the snow. And at the end of the week, we do one more feat where we hike up a mountain in Poland. It's a ski hill, really. It's called Snezka. But we go from the base to the top. It's 2 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And for those of you who knows only Celsius, you do the conversion. I don't know what it is. It's in the negatives. But I hike up this mountain, and it's 8 hours on the mountain, and I'm sweating the whole way to the top. And again, I'm just in hiking boots and a bathing suit. And just learning to make that transition from a guy who's totally not into this to someone who's doing this pretty extreme feat made me have to totally reevaluate the claims that Wim was making. And, since that article was published, since that was in 2012, his stature in the world has just skyrocketed. I was one of the first real feature journalists to come and meet him. And now he's like this international man of mystery, flying all over the world, hanging out with celebrities. And people are really embracing this idea that getting cold can make you a lot stronger.
Okay. Do you remember when you first turned up, what your self-talk was like? What the kind of, were you thinking, right, I'm looking for these things that could expose him as a charlatan, or that you just completely open?
So as a journalist, I have to be able to give people a fair shot. Like it's not journalism to go in there and just know what you're going to say before you do it. So I'm fairly open with all of my sources, but I'm also ready to ask hard questions and ready to pounce if I need to. And there's lots of things that Wim says that I don't necessarily buy. He'll make claims that his breathing method will foster world peace, right? This is something that he says somewhat frequently. And I don't see a connection between hyperventilation and world peace. It's just not there. So I sort of put that to the side and be like, well, of course we know this claim is false. but what are the things that are actually happening? So I'm sort of able to grab the good and take that as far as it goes. And no one died on our trip. I think we had like 8 people going up the mountain that day. Everyone was thriving in this environment, and that was just very, very cool to see.
Was there anyone who didn't get the same level of results as you did?
Not on that trip, no. Okay. On that trip, I think I was probably the weakest link, is my guess. I was probably older than a lot of the people on that program, probably with the more lackluster workouts. At that time, the people who were interested in Wim were, we're talking top level CrossFitters. We're talking people who have, one of the guys was a Krav Maga, student, been doing it for years and years and years. So I was probably, I was just the dude who could do 20 push-ups who came along. So I was by far the weakest link on the program. And since then, of course, the interest in these sorts of techniques have gotten broader. So now there's more of a range of people who do try it.
So how's your life affected or been changed since you've taken this on board?
Well, I do the breathing method almost every morning, and which is it's about a 15-minute breathing workout with some breathless push-ups thrown in at the end. And then I also, at every time I jump into the snow in like my, in a bathing suit and try to get cold, and regularly expose myself to sort of temperature extremes. And I mean, it's great. If you've read the book, if you get down to the end of it, I've actually tested my metabolism before and after, and for the 6 months that I was doing the main research for the book, this is after that Playboy story. This is years later when I sort of just do the method every day, and I keep a standard workout regimen, which is the 15-minute breathing method, and then my normal exercise routines, which was about 3 times a week, doing like a run around, like a 3-mile run, or like a swimming, or hiking in the mountains, but nothing intense at all. When I measured my metabolism before at the Boulder Sports Medicine Center, I was mostly a carb burner. I could handle 6 incremental stages on a sort of a stress test treadmill. But at the end of the program, after just really adding the breathing method, I became primarily a fat burner. And I was able to do additional stages on this stress test. And the physician who was studying me was like wowed by these results. He was like, it's like you added 7 hours of exercise onto your routine every week. And I really added like an hour of breathing instead.
That's incredible. And one of the things that Wim talks about a lot as well is the kind of the anti-illness side of things. How is that kind of been more prevalent in your life? Have you found yourself being able to control your response to infection and stuff like
that? Infection, I don't. It's hard to say, right? If I'm able to control my response to infection, because you need to get infected for that to work, right? So, but I think what the Wim Hof method does is it expands your margin of your resistance. Like if normally you're able to resist, how do you make an allegory that works? I'm holding my hands like 6 inches apart, and that's like your normal band of resistance to foreign infections and stuff. And this, now I'm holding my hands about 8 inches apart or 9 inches apart, and it gives you this margin of error for resistance to either elements or infection or something like that. And so it's not like I can't get sick. I certainly have been sick after doing even after I do the training, but I think it's harder for me to get sick than it was before. And another interesting thing is I used to get canker sores. Ever since I was a kid, I get these mouth ulcers, these big, gnarly, they could get to the size of an American dime in my mouth, and it would make it hard to talk. It would make it hard to smile. I was in like misery from these mouth ulcers. And since doing the training, I don't get them anymore. I get maybe once a year. I'll get a little small one, and it'll go away in a couple days, which is pretty amazing. And it's because the Wim Hof method is really, really useful for working on autoimmune illnesses. And there's lots of scientific research now showing that by doing cold exposure, by doing this sort of pressuring your fight or flight response, you can suppress autoimmune responses. And the way I like to think of it is this: our species is 200,000 years old. We the Homo sapiens sapien, our exact little genetic twig, goes back that long. And in that time, we had constant variation in our environment. We would have to, there would be a snowstorm and we'd have to live through it. If there'd be a scorching, a summer day, you'd have to live through it. You might want to trek across that mountain, and the only way to do it was to walk over that mountain. And we had some technology. We had fire. We had some foot bindings. We had some basic technology, but our bodies still had to adapt to the world that it was inhabiting. Now, fast forward to the last maybe 100 years, and comfort is available at the flip of a switch. We are living in basically what we call a homeostatic environment, where the environment is completely subservient to the most incremental and tiny effort that you might ever make. So we don't have to adapt. We live in a perpetual summer. And because we don't have these variations anymore, but we've only not had the variations for the last 100 years, the changes, the environmental changes which used to be taken for granted are no longer there. And this immune system that we have, which is designed to resist, it's there because it has to go resist the environment, is essentially just kicking around in your body with nothing to do. And doing these cold showers, doing these breathing techniques is basically the equivalent of giving a predator a chew toy. And it's chewing on it, and so it doesn't have to chew on your joints for rheumatoid arthritis. For Crohn's disease, it doesn't have to go chew on your intestines and make ulcers there. For diabetes, tons of autoimmune illnesses seem to be reversible with these methods, and that's just so inspiring.
Yeah, I think my favorite line from your book was, "Our bodies are reflections of the environment we inhabit," and it's completely true. I think a lot of people lack adversity for confusing happiness with comfort. I think it's a kind of distressing kind of state we find ourselves, and I also think that's why Stoicism is kind of rising up. But back onto the topic. Had you tried any meditation before that?
The original title for the book was The New Stoics. That was how I sold it. And then I went back and started reading some of the Stoics. And I was like, these guys are assholes. like they are such dicks. And so I was like, I can't call it with the Stoics. Because a lot of it is like not just resisting the environment. A lot is like this moral, like they hate everybody.
Yeah, I think there's a few ways to take it. If you you can take it very literally, or you can see the segments of gold that are in there. As with all things like that. Did you have any meditation technique before that, or anything like that? Or did you try anything like that?
Yeah, so I have a very long history with meditation, both in my family and also just career and interest-wise. I lived in India for 6 years, studied anthropology there, traveled there extensively, and I initially went there with an interest in understanding meditation, deeper. But I was really turned off of it after one event in my life in about 2000, I think it was in 2005, where I was leading this abroad program. This is back in my anthropology days when I was trying to be a professor. And I was leading these American college students throughout all the holy sites in North India. And we end up in Bodh Gaya, which is the place where Buddha attained enlightenment about 2,800 years ago. And we do this 10-day silent meditation retreat. And I'm one of the students, I'm the director of the program, but for this training session, I'm just one of the students. And we have a nun teaching us what's called Lam Rim in Tibetan. And we're totally quiet, and we're learning about nirvana, we're learning about enlightenment, we're learning about bliss, and all of these really positive things. But at the end of the retreat, my best student in the program, a girl named Emily O'Connor, and that's a pseudonym, but that's fine. We're just done with the silent meditation. She's had some pretty big realizations, and she climbs up to the roof of the retreat center and jumps to her death, committing suicide at the end of this 10-day silent meditation retreat. And as the person who is responsible for all of these students, it's my task to bring her corpse back home. And I read her journal, and it says, the last words in it are, "I am a bodhisattva," which means in Tibetan, a bodhisattva is basically a being that is now enlightened. And she reasoned that all she had to do was leave her physical body, and then that she would be sort of reborn in sort of a new form. And this was probably the most pivotal event in my life. It was, probably the reason why I quit anthropology as well. That when I realized that something so beautiful could go so terribly wrong, I needed to understand this, and I started, examining this dark side of the spiritual path. I collected journals. I had about 12 journals of people who either killed themselves on meditation retreats or ended up in mental asylums. And it's this thing that we don't talk about. And it led into that second book, right, where I started unmasking a guru for teaching these fake things. So, I have this, very mixed relationship with meditation techniques. On one hand, I acknowledge that there's something very, very beautiful in the spiritual practice, but I also realize that there's this veil that can go with it, where you start meditating and you start thinking you're something greater than what you actually are. You think that you have superpowers. You think that, you sit and you meditate, there are going to be colors, there's going to be realizations, and you're going to feel like you're learning so much about yourself, and it's you that's doing it. And there's this risk of that your ego gets so blown out of proportion that you lose touch with reality.
Was there anything that was like a predictor of people who would respond negatively to meditation?
Westerners, in particular, and we have a very convoluted relationship with Buddhist practices in the West, and it's mostly because we interpret Eastern religions through a Judeo-Christian lens, and I wasn't raised in a Christian household, but I certainly understand the idea of a heaven or hell. And the way I think about life and death often is just culturally through that lens. And so Westerners are known, especially in the Tibetan Buddhist community. There was a text called by what's his name? should have. His name is. It's called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. And the thing is that Westerners are so fixated on this goal of enlightenment. That I have to go get enlightened, and I need to be there. And then when I get there, then everything's going to be awesome, and it's going to be like I'm an angel. It's going to be like I'm in heaven because we hear these stories, right? Stories about monks sitting in snow and melting all the snow around them, and the Dalai Lama walking through a wall or whatever. I mean, we have this idea of like a Asian mystic superpower guy, right? Like, where does Batman train? Where does he trains in Tibet, right? Why does he train in Tibet? Because Tibet is where superpowers are. And we have this sort of like folklore notion of Eastern techniques, and it's hard to get away from that. And in that previous book, I really go into depth on how these ideas have made it to the West. And there's it's weird publishing contracts in the 1800s that thrived on think of those dime store novels of the American West where everyone's a gunfighter, like the dime store novels of Tibet where everyone's a floating yogi, and that's how we have interpreted a lot of this stuff. So we have a very poor understanding of what actually goes on in India. And the funny thing is that people in India also have a poor understanding of what's going on in India because they're reading these Western books that show how great. It's so funny. It's like this, it's this dialectic that's going back and forth it's a dialectic of misunderstanding.
Okay. So how does that spiritual side of things or do you think your understanding of meditation affected your interactions with Wim Hof and his method?
Oh, absolutely. I'm very skeptical of the insights that might occur in meditation because I'm wary of thinking of myself as a god, right? Or having anyone think of themselves as something greater than they are. But the nice thing about Wim, and this is perhaps why I really like him so much, is that Wim is not a great guru. Like, he's a terrible guru.
Why is that?
He's a terrible role model. Like, if you talk to him, he's disorganized. His speech goes all over the place. He makes these claims that everyone knows are just ludicrous. He has a history of alcoholism. He was a smoker for many, many years. He's one of these guys who's if you look at him, if you know him at all, you're like, I would never want to be you, Wim. I just would never want to be. And anyone who knows him has the same interaction. And that's why he's awesome, because you can go meet him and you can be like, you could just, his flaws are so obvious, and they're so human that you don't need to follow them. And so you can take the good because he's obviously got these amazing things that he does and he's capable of teaching. And you can just take the good and say, I'm just going to run with the good. And when you start doing something crazy, Wim, I can be like, well, he's crazy, so I'm out of here. And that's the real magic of Wim. The magic of him is he's a terrible guru.
Was there any particular time when you thought this is the flaws in air quotes of Wim?
A particular time? No, it's more like a running 6-year event. I mean, there's lots of things that you're like, oh man. The one that I sort of talk about most in the book is climbing up Mount Kilimanjaro with him. And so after this 6-year journey however many years I'm studying with him, I say I'm going to do the biggest test of my training, and just to climb up Mount Kilimanjaro in what is record time for not actual record. Actual record's like 6 hours by this like crazy ultra runner who first like acclimatized to the top. But for an unacclimatized hike to the top, this is what we're told is a record, but regardless if it's a record or not, it's 5 times faster than anyone who's sane does it. We go up and I'm just wearing shorts, a hat and boots, and we make it to the top in 28 hours. But in the last leg, Wim is, we are just battered and exhausted. We just were like buffeted by crazy winds, and we're at this hut called Kibo, where we have the option of there's a lunch. So it's going to be a hot lunch coming for us, and then after the hot lunch we're going to be able to have some food and we'll go up. And Wim is just like, no, we must go now. We're going to miss our window for the record. And everyone's like, you're crazy, dude. Just give us like 15 minutes. We just want to wait. And so he like storms out. And the whole expedition, I think we had like 28 people with us, are just looking at him. They're all swearing at him. And I'm like, this is, Wim is a prophet and Wim is a madman at the same time. And like, I probably mostly because I'm writing a book about him, I'm like, all right, I'm going to go follow this fucker. And I do.
Right here.
Yeah. And I sort of like trudge past, and like one other guy comes with it, and the guides are like, no, for trying to like physically bar our way and bar his way. And, we walk up and I'm walking up behind Wim and everyone thinks he's going to get someone killed, including me. And it's where I realized that Wim is many things, but he's not a great leader of men. He's a great sort of conduit for delivering this knowledge. And only Wim could have discovered this method. But the only reason you should do it is because you're doing it for yourself. Mm. You don't want to become this dude. And that's sort of what I realized. I'm walking up the mountain and I see him trip and stumble. I realize that he's got limits too. He just, just his drive. He doesn't believe him, but his drive is so much. I mean, he could very well get killed on one of his events. If Wim tries to summit Everest again and he makes a misstep or makes a mistake, there's no reason why Wim cannot die doing his stuff. He's almost died 3 or 4 times doing various feats of his, and he's injured himself doing various things, and he's always escaped. But eventually, I expect that he could get to a place where everything falls apart. And here's the important thing is that we still need to salvage that if that happens. We need to say, if Wim does push himself past his limits, it's not because he was wrong about the things that humans can do. And it's that humans are capable of great things, but in the battle of us versus nature will always win.
Yeah, definitely. The story that comes to mind with me, with him just completely disregarding his safety, is his attempt at swimming underwater.
Right.
When he completely, as far as I recollect it, he was going to do a test one, which was like halfway through, so he jumped under the ice and started swimming, and his eyes froze over and couldn't see. That's incredible.
Yeah. So there were 2 holes. I think it was a 50-meter distance underneath the Arctic ice. I think this is in Finland somewhere. And he is, he's got like Discovery Channel is going to do a show on him. And he's like, I'm going to impress these guys. So before the swim, they're doing like testing safety protocols. They've put 3 holes in the ice. The starting hole, a hole at about 25 meters and a hole at 50 meters. And the hole in the middle is like the safety hole. And they just want to see, check the camera angles, all that stuff. And say, okay, why don't you swim underwater to that? And then tomorrow we'll try this Guinness Book of World Records. And he's like, no, yeah, that sounds great. And he goes in there and he's like, I'm going to go swim the whole way. But he doesn't have goggles on and his eyeballs freeze and he's blind underneath the ice. And he ends up like swimming 70 strokes, which is like way more than 50 meters at the end of the day because he can't find the hole. And he's basically dying under the ice. And the only reason he comes out is because a safety diver has grabbed him by the leg and brought up. He would have died had not this Discovery team been on their shit that day. And he's lucky that he did, because if he had died at that point, everyone would have just been like, he's a circus act.
Yeah.
And circus acts sometimes die.
Yeah, I'd recommend anyone listening to this to listen to his episode with Joe Rogan, because you get a great insight into who Wim actually is in that. When you hear him saying stuff, and is it his son who works with him saying, "Stop saying that, stop saying that." Say that. That's awesome. I love the book, and I love the way you write. So first of all, where can people find out a bit more about you, and then we'll get into some quick fire questions as well.
Sure. Well, I mean, I have a website, scottcarney.com. If you just Google "what doesn't kill us," I'm sure that's going to show up right on the Google rankings. There's Amazon pages. There's like anywhere that I can sell a book. I am selling a book right now. I've just got an audiobook out. And if you just love the sweet, sweet sounds of my voice, you get to listen to it for like 10 hours or however long that audiobook is. It's all over the place. And it's a lot of people are really fascinated by this message, and I'm glad to have been able to bring it out. Yeah, and it comes out in such a positive way, and such
enlightening way. I'd say it's like, oh, I've got this whole new thing to look at and this whole new perspective on the world. It's a really cool piece.
Thanks.
Other than your book, what's the book you've gifted most to others?
This is a story. You took this question from Tools of Titans from Tim Ferriss, didn't you?
I do indeed. I love it.
The book that I have personally gifted most to other people is probably Ernest Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea.
Okay, cool. That's I think that's actually the first fiction book we've had on it, so it's awesome. Hey. And aside from Wim's method, is there any daily routines you follow?
Yes. I mean, I use a modification of Wim's breathing.
Sorry, can you go into how that varies from the traditional method?
Yeah, I do retentions in sort of a different timing from him. My recovery breath looks a little different, but basically it's hyperventilation. So about 30 deep, quick breaths that sound like 30 times, get a little lightheaded. Maybe I'll take that out as long as a minute, and I'm timing this. And then I do a full breath out and then hold it for, and usually the first time's about a minute. And then I'll do the repeat of that. And then I'll hold it for about 2 minutes. And then I'll do another one and I'll hold it for 3 minutes. And then at the end of that, I'll do one more breathing routine, breath out, and I'll do push-ups. And I aim for about 50 push-ups when I do that, which is pretty easy.
That's a decent amount of push-ups. If you're doing decent push-ups, that's decent anyway.
Yeah, I don't know if I do decent push-ups. I do the push-ups that I've always done. I've Googled, because people have asked me, like, what sort of push-ups do you do? And I'm like, I don't know. I just done the one I've done since I was a kid. So I Googled around, and then people have like these really intense things, which I always thought of as chaturungas, which are like, elbows in, and you're doing I don't do those. I do it out. Call me a wimp if you want. I don't care. I do the push-ups that I like. You can do the push-ups you like.
As long as your shoulder is stable, we're happy.
Yeah. Shoulders are stable.
And what do you believe that? Oh, sorry. Let's go into the rest of your routine, actually.
Right. So then I do 50 of those, and then I will sort of immediately kick up into a headstand, and keep that for about 30-ish seconds, and then I'm done with the routine. Except that then during the day when I take a shower, I'll start with a hot shower, then I'll go to cold for like 30 seconds or a minute at the end, and voila, I'm done. And and then every chance I get, I jump into the snow or I jump into cold water when I can. But sometimes that's like hard to find a right amount of snow. Like that's sort of, if you're in the summer, what do you do? Like, I don't know, whatever I do. Yeah, sometimes I'll just go for a run or something.
Yeah. What do you believe that some other people find controversial
about the book?
Anything
in the world? I don't know, the Brexit. How do you like that?
Top left. I like it.
Why'd you guys leave? Come back.
I know it's ridiculous.
I mean, we live in an age of controversy right now. Everything political in the planet is controversial at the moment. In terms of the book, I think that people are going to be wary about the claims of pushing your body. People are worried about dangers, and of course there are dangers with the Wim Hof method. And I think practicing within your limits and seeing for yourself how things work is very, very important. And you need to be critical constantly, and so that you don't lose yourself in your own mind.
Is there anything that you particularly look out for when you're looking at people like Wim and people that you if you're looking for someone on the skeptical side and you think they could be a charlatan? Is there anything that stands out there?
If they make superhuman claims, they need superhuman evidence to get behind it. And at the end of the day, you're responsible for your own everything, right? And if you're coming from a very broken place already, for any number of reasons that a human might be in a low spot, to put complete faith into another person, it very rarely works out for the person who's giving up their control. And I'd always be skeptical because we're ultimately responsible for ourselves.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a pretty cool place to end. Thank you so much for jumping on the show, and just give us a reminder of where we can find out a bit more about you and your book.
Yep, scottcarney.com. That's my website and all that stuff. There's Twitter, there's Facebook, there's all the normal social media stuff. The book is What Doesn't Kill Us: How Freezing Water, Extreme Altitude, Environmental Conditioning Will Renew Our Lost Evolutionary Strength. Buy it on all the places you buy stuff, and there's a great audiobook, so download that.
That's great, Scott. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Alpha Movement Podcast. If you enjoyed it, of course, reach out to Scott or I, tag us in posts if you're going to share it, and all that kind of stuff. And remember, I've got the Alpha Athletes page 2.0. Now, season 2 is well underway. I'm sure you're loving this. However, it's just the beginning of some awesome interviews, especially in terms of CrossFit athletes. I've got a lot on the way, and frankly, you guys are going to love this. So let's look forward to another episode, and I'll see you soon.